Hate crimes exist in Columbia, South Carolina. They're here, and this is a case that's a great example of that.
Hate crimes in South Carolina. A Midlands man charged by the feds after authorities say he shot at someone last summer similarly because he was black. An incident we've told you about before and now sparking more debate over the state's lack of a hate crime law.
The South Carolina legislature returns in just a few weeks. Bills are being pre-filed. What's going to be happening during the second half of the legislative session?
Every baby is precious, and we need to do much more to help make sure that babies are getting a great start and that they and their moms have healthy futures.
The latest 2023 infant mortality rates for South Carolina have come out, and the news is not good, up nearly 3%.
If you don't want to hear what I got to say, you're going to say
Well, the debate over data centers hitting a fever pitch. Hundreds of people showing up in the low country to say, not in our backyard, but like it or not, those centers are coming to South Carolina. We look at what's really at the root of that dispute. It is Sunday in South Carolina. This week's Connect to the Capitol starts right now.
This case is deeply disturbing. Hate crimes do more than harm an individual. They send a message of fear and intimidation to an entire community.
The FBI on the case after the sheriff of Richland County turned to the feds to charge a Midlands man with a federal hate crime. Sheriff Leon Lott issuing a clear challenge to state lawmakers just a few days ago, and it's very simple. Pass a statewide hate crime bill. We have talked about this topic a number of times here on Connect to the Capitol, and we're going to start off with it again on this Sunday. Of course, Dave Wilson and Catherine Glenn Foster, they're over my shoulder here, but they're with us this week. This is where we begin. A case we talked about over the summer, back, front, and center just before the legislative session is about to begin. So, does Leon Lott's challenge get picked up by anybody?
That's the big question right now, because when the sheriff of one of the leading counties in South Carolina turns around and says this, it's going to ask the question that legislators are going to have to answer, because hate crimes legislation does not exist except it exists in every state but two, South Carolina being one of those. And Brian, you'll remember that we talked about this the other week. And Catherine, when we looked at this, there were counties across the state that were at least looking at this, municipalities that were looking at this. But the Attorney General has basically said, whoa, wait a minute, let's see. I don't know if we can actually do this or not.
That's right. So, as you said, only 2 states do not have a hate crimes law at the state level. A couple of counties have tried here and attempted to get one of these hate crimes laws passed. The Attorney General not so sure about that, but that does put us out of step with almost every other state in our nation. Now, there's a lot of debate back and forth that goes on about hate crimes laws. We can all agree, as the sheriff said, a hate crime has zero place in our county and our state. It is the most reprehensible of actions when it's just driven by hate. The question is, how do we make a difference? How do we prevent these hate crimes from taking place? And to what extent is it education? To what extent is it legislation? Is it the threat of a hate crime being levied upon you if you commit some crime with this particular motivation? There are people who argue that it can create double jeopardy. That almost it's a double charge for one single crime, and that all crimes are in fact motivated by hate. But when it comes down to it, we do know that across the board, almost every state has said, yes, we want this at least on the table, at least out there, so that people know that our state, every other state almost, will stand firm against this type of behavior.
Yeah, it's not that those at the State House have ignored it. The House has done this a couple times, and it just never gets anywhere in the Senate. I don't know if increased public pressure is going to make a difference come January or not.
It's really a big question because, as we've talked about before, there are only 18 weeks of the legislative session. 3 days out of the week, that's 54 days. Not only are they going to have to deal with the budget, which is the number one issue that has to be dealt with every year, they're going to have to be dealing with the casino that's coming up, that's going to be right at the top of the list going there in the House. The discussion we've had about the potential casino along I-95. You've also going to have to deal with issues of THC beverages in South Carolina. That's going to be a hot issue. And how are we going to start dealing with the changes in taxes? And how do we fund our roads? We had a whole segment about this last week where we were talking about how are we going to deal with funding for roads, especially in areas of the state where you have a whole lot of growth that's going on.
There are a lot of bills coming up, that is for sure. And in fact, we have a segment coming up on that. But in the meantime, we know that when it comes down to it, the lawmakers, the members of the State House, they are working for us, for we the people. And so when it comes to what needs to be addressed outside of just mandatory budgeting kinds of issues, public pressure has a huge impact. When you, as a citizen of South Carolina, as a resident of South Carolina, if you reach out to a lawmaker's office, if you maybe send an email, then they know that there are so many more people out there who believe the same thing. Let's say you call. Calling is hard a lot of times for people, increasingly so. People know that the lawmakers know that there are even more people out there who care. And if you are able to carve out some time in your day to actually show up at a lawmaker's office, to make your voice heard, to make that appointment and just sit down and explain your position, tell your story in a respectful but an impactful way, then they know that there are 1,000 plus additional South Carolinians who believe the same thing. And that is what can often make a difference between a bill being heard or not and what that ultimate vote may be.
So, Brian, I think what we've seen in this past week is now U.S. Attorney, he has now been put into that position officially, former Director of the Department of Corrections, Brian Sterling, who is now the U.S. Attorney for South Carolina, said, listen, we've got an issue. We're going to put the federal hate crimes law into effect, and we're going to go after this guy. That is a level of the two different levels of government at state and federal. Federal can go ahead and do that because the law already exists on the books. But in South Carolina, that's not the case. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next few weeks. If there is going to be a discussion about this, most likely the House, as they have done time and time again, will probably end up passing a piece of legislation. They're more apt to do that. The Senate has been very reticent in doing that, over especially the last several years when it's been attempted.
Yeah, they sure have. As Catherine hinted there, we do have a segment coming up here about what lies ahead. About 3 weeks
absolutely, Brian. We've got a whole legislative session that's coming up, 18 weeks of what's going to be happening. We'll cover that when we come back. Columbia is going to be getting really busy over the next few weeks. The South Carolina legislature is returning to handle the second half of this legislative session. It's going to be interesting, though, as they come back, because when they do, in just a few weeks after that, it's going to be time for people to be filing to run for office in March. That really, today, folks, has a big impact on what goes on when we think about what's happening in the legislature, how they're doing things. Brian, I think we had a story on the air earlier this week talking about the fact that there are more bills that are coming up, hundreds of them that have been introduced.
More than 300. I think it's 327 is the exact amount that have been pre-filed. Not anywhere close to that are going to get signed into law.
No,
or even passed for that.
That's the interesting part, because less than 100 bills have actually passed this legislative session in the first half. The governor has signed some into law, but there's so many different things that are out there. I mean, there's resolutions about naming roads and certain sections of highways for certain people and things along those. But the interesting one that I found in scrolling through them was there was a debate that went on, and it really got contentious in the South Carolina House, and 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans were going head to head on that. They've now both had resolutions to censure each other. That's just one of the things that's getting put up on the docket
I saw
for
that one.
consideration.
Yeah, and it was filed one after the other, just right in a row. So you can only imagine what was happening behind the scenes there. But it really is interesting, the confluence of the introduction of bills, the filing of bills, and filing for these offices, and how that can impact one and the other. Obviously, if you're running for office and you've got an election ahead of you, sometimes that impacts the bills that you may file or sign on to. But we have such a wide variety, as you can imagine, with 300 filed, ranging from our state's economic outlook, the influence, education, all kinds of things.
Right. Everything from that to roads to what are we going to do about
Yeah.
energy. And still, you'll recall, we had this whole discussion last legislative session. Brian, I mean, we had guests on the air about this several different times, talking about liquor liability laws. How are we going to handle that? And the Senate spent like 4, 5, 6 weeks on this issue.
5 weeks.
5 weeks on this issue, and came to a resolve. But in talking to every single one of them, it seems to be said over and over again, we only got about halfway there. So you can almost guarantee that that's going to be coming back up on the docket. That, and the other big issue is the Judicial Merit Selection Committee.
Yes.
How do we choose judges in South Carolina, Brian?
And that's something we've been talking about for the last year. I think every week since we've been on the air, at least since the first week, we've been talking about that issue and so many of these other issues that come up. With those 300 bills filed, of course, most will not see a signature. Many will not see the light of day. But then there are always bills that see the light of day, may get a hearing. But it's interesting to see how those hearings get scheduled and what may lead to that scheduling. For example, on abortion, when South Carolina, already one of the most restrictive abortion states in the nation, and yet we had a hearing on what would have been the most radical bill, the most radical law from coast to coast, not a couple months ago.
Right.
I'll tell you, the most important one is those lawmakers don't want to censure each other. I know John Q. Public sitting at home really cares about 2 people censuring each other.
There is that one. And plus, there was the one that said, we're now going to make it legal in South Carolina to round up or round down to the nearest nickel, because
they're
apparently
not
the
minting
U.S.
pennies
Treasury
anymore.
and
There
the
you go.
U.S. Mint will no longer be making pennies.
And it's easier than changing prices, apparently. I guess Walmart no longer wants that, dollar.
Yeah, the $1.03, it's
Yeah.
going to be more. We'll just take it to $1.05 now. So
Yes.
How about we take the pennies that are left over and let's just fix some roads? A few potholes.
Fix
We
the
can fill in the
roads,
potholes with
exactly.
the pennies.
That
How's that
would
sound?
make sense.
How's that
Well,
sound?
in our next segment, we're going to be talking about some sobering numbers. The 2023 South Carolina infant mortality rate has come out, and it is up 2.9%. The rate's rising highest among Black and Hispanic mothers. Serious figures. We'll be talking about that when we come back.
South Carolina still remains one of the states in this country that has not adopted or expanded Medicaid. That in and of itself is a factor that leads toward and supports the notion that people don't have access to care.
South Carolina's Public Health Department has released the latest 2023 numbers for infant mortality, or the death of newborn infants up to 1 year old. And they are staggering, an increase of 2.9% over the previous year, 2022. The top 3 causes were low birth weight and early birth, preterm birth, birth defects, and sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. Now, most impactfully, the highest numbers were among Black and Hispanic families. These numbers are deeply concerning for all South Carolinians, but I think they really speak to our health system, to how we're serving families, and to the ability of certain communities in particular to be able to really advocate for themselves within a healthcare system that has historically been all too biased against them.
Well, one of the interesting aspects of that is the access to healthcare, especially in our rural areas of the state. Brian, we had talked about this previously, and we have had these conversations, Catherine, where we are looking at the decrease in Medicaid, decrease in the funding that goes towards that, and rural hospitals that have been shutting down or been consolidated into larger health systems. This is a concerning factor because if you live in rural South Carolina, you could oftentimes be 20, 30, 45 minutes up to an hour till you can get to a healthcare facility. And if that's the case, what are you getting for regular healthcare at just in general?
Much less in a critical time of life, for example, pregnancy. When we pull back our healthcare resources, when we no longer invest in the health of South Carolinians, when we leave swaths of our state really untouched by the best, the most modern healthcare, and when we have all too often healthcare facilities that aren't giving heed to the expressed experience and need of the very people who are coming for help, who know themselves, who know their own bodies, then at that point, we have a real health crisis in our state.
Now, the good news that we heard late this week from Dr. Edward Simmer from the Department of Public Health is that they're going to start doing mobile clinics because there are some counties that don't have any OBGYNs at all. There are a handful that only have one. So that speaks to the point about what you said, Dave, that there are people that are 45 minutes away from any type of health care, mind you. So this is a step in the right direction, the mobile clinics to some of these underserved areas. But as we talked in the last segment, there's going to have to be work done at the State House in terms of funding, maybe in the budget, for more outreach like this.
Those mobile health clinics are a great stopgap, but they are not a permanent solution. No. We cannot leave the women of our state going through pregnancy, often in critical crisis type of healthcare situations, often 30, 45 minutes from the closest healthcare facility that can deal with their needs, that can address their crisis in real time. So those mobile clinics are wonderful, but we need more. And we're expecting that the State House will continue to take that up, along with, of course, advocacy from the Public Health Department.
And this really ties back to a broader issue that's happening in the reduction of the number of healthcare workers in South Carolina. I was flying up to DC today and had this conversation with a traveling nurse and her husband, and they were going from city to city in short-term contracts, which have been fantastic for those who are doing it. But it tells you just how much the need exists for healthcare professionals in this state. The point brought up a moment ago, there are certain counties, of the 46 counties, there are certain counties in the state with no OBGYN services whatsoever. And we've got other counties that are dwindling in population. So the old county hospital doesn't exist like it used to. And that's now getting into these larger conglomerates. So for what Dr. Simmer had to say, I think it's a good move forward for a stopgap. But there are also issues when you see a rise like this of nearly 3% of infant mortality. That tells you that, as we've talked about so many times, there's an upstream problem that we're feeling downstream.
That's right. And when we have a situation where we aren't reinvesting in every single county, when we have nearly 50% of the population who at a minimum needs to be seeing a gynecologist at least once a year, even outside of pregnancy, then we need to take a good hard look at the healthcare system in our state.
Absolutely. And speaking of need, the need for power, the need for electricity as our population continues to grow. That's what we're looking at when we come back. Another topic that we have touched many times, but this week things got heated in the Low Country when it comes to data centers and the power that they suck up. That's when we come back.
Obviously, data centers are popping up everywhere, but they're putting pressure on the utility systems all across the country. So that means electricity bills are starting to skyrocket.
Our old buddy Antoine Seawright, Dave's sparring partner there, weighing in on the debate over data centers here in South Carolina. Just one piece of this state's growing demand for power as the population just keeps on growing. Lawmakers started to address the power grid issue earlier this year, but clearly more work needs to be done. We saw in the open today how there were some heated tempers down in the low country this week at some public meetings about the possibility of data centers going into Colleton County. Those meetings were packed with people that said, no way, we don't want it, we don't care. But they're coming here. We have open space.
They're coming to South Carolina.
They are
part of the
sure.
backbone of the internet infrastructure. Everything that you think about when you think about using your phone, you use your computer, especially with the big moves that are going on with AI. We were having a conversation about education the other day. We've gone from an agrarian to an industrial to the information society, but we are now entering into the next phase of society, and that is the AI part of our society. And you know full well, AI doesn't exist without that computing power that goes behind it. That's one of the reasons that you have companies like Microsoft and Google and Meta who are saying we're going to have data centers as a part of what we're doing.
More than ever before, we all as a society rely upon data. We rely upon fast data, and yet even in 2025, too often I'll come to some site trying to buy tickets or something and get placed into some kind of queue and have to wait for a couple of minutes. So that's frustrating. When your phone connection is slow, it's frustrating. We want rural broadband. We want connectivity for every American. But on the other hand, these data centers do drive up electricity bills, they drive up water bills, and the damage to the environment is significant. So there's a debate to be had here. There are questions that have to be answered before we start having data centers come in and leave a footprint that local residents may not always entirely understand until it's already built.
Yeah, until, like you said, they don't have a phone signal or proper access to the internet, or the ball game's on and they can't see it. That's when I think everybody realizes, wait a minute, that's what these things do.
It's 4th and 1 with 30 seconds left, and you're sitting there going, really?
Go Cox.
This is where, but
it would be go away at that point because you can't see it.
Exactly. And this is there's an important part of the environmental part that you talked about a moment ago, Catherine. This has been touted as part of economic development in South Carolina. But keep in mind this, too. It doesn't take nearly as many people to run a data center as it does to build a BMW or a Volvo or a Boeing jet or the tires that we have in South Carolina or the boats for that matter. And while these businesses are making big investments, they are not creating as many jobs. But honestly, especially in rural areas of South Carolina where you have the land and the resources to do this, they really don't want them in their backyard.
We care about our people, our jobs, and our people's bills, the ability to just put food on the table. We care about our state's wild spaces, but we also care about that game. And so balancing all that out it's difficult.
Well, you know what else we care about, and that's the holiday we got coming up.
Yes, we do.
Amen.
We've got the Christmas holiday coming up, and this has just been a great, honestly, we're wrapping up our first year of Connect to the Capitol. And as we all get ready to celebrate Christmas and the Hanukkah season's going on, you got Kwanzaa happening. There are so many times for you to get together with family. We're grateful that you took a Sunday morning to join us to talk about a little bit of politics on a Sunday morning here in South Carolina.
Yeah, thank everybody. I hope we enjoy your holiday. We're getting together via Zoom, but we're going to see each other in person in this studio.
Yes, we will.
Yes.
Enjoy the holidays, folks. We will see you again in a week.
Take care.
Happy holidays.